All right, guys. Good morning. My name is. Welcome to another edition of In Production by Ink 2. Um, in this class, we're going to talk about Microsoft SQL administrating administration. Um, Not just the administration aspect of it, but also to kind of understand how the design. We're just going to talk about replication and how to replicate and how to fail over with clusters and whatnot. But you guys have to understand um, what is Microsoft SQL, and before you get into the administrating and have your administrators administrator the work, or your engineers design your architect or your architected designs, and your administrator administrating those designs, those VMs or those servers. You have to understand the background and what it is, because um, it's important. So I'm your cloud architect um, and trainer, Sal Cosentino. Okay. And we are on June 2nd, 2025. So our first goal is to, understand what a database is, and the basics of a database, because you can't just go ahead and say, design something without knowing the basics first and understand the what those databases are before we go ahead and we plan, we configure, or we just migrate, import, we add roles, because in this class, I'm going to focus on the database itself and what the database is, right? Because the database is important. You guys know what I do and how I do it. There are some, recommended books out there for you guys to look at, and some of the books that I've done in the past are um, the SQL servers. There's some good books that I still have and I still use. Uh, Books, right? So these are some good books that I've referenced to, and you know these are some of the PDFs that there's one that's called Unleashed by Ray Rankins and Paul Bertucci and Chris Galletti and Alex Orstein. So these are some good books that I've gone. Here it is. Here it is. Okay, so this is one that I have here. It's a great book. I recommend you buy this book, um, as it's important, right? I recommend you buy it. You know, anything to do with this book here is great, right? Um, Again, this was back in 2015. I still use it, right? So I still use the book. I have the hard copy. Read the reviews. Here's another book that you can read too, Integration Services. Um, right. So here's some technical ePress, right? So here's another ePress that you guys can take a look at and read the different editions and explain what Power BI works and how that's introduced. And here's the contents, table of contents, so you can take a look. But again, that book is a great book. I recommend you guys buy it. Um, there should be some stock available. Uh, Again, there's a paperback and there's a Kindle version. Um, you know, Great book. I've used it a lot, and I love it. As you can see, a lot of people here use it, and there's a lot of pros and cons, and different reviews from other parts of the country. Again, that's a great book. I recommend you guys want to buy that. Then please feel free for this course or for my class because you know it's got a lot of information that I'm going to reference as well too, right? Um, so we want to go back to, okay, so let's go back to our notes here, and we want to talk about what a database is, right? Databases. What is it? Database. What is that? Like it's something that's a question that a lot of people ask, and a lot of people talk about. And to reference what if in simplest definition, a database, it's just a collection of information that's organized uh, so that it can be easily accessed, easily managed, and updated. Um, data data is organized um, into rows, and you guys will understand this as we go on and as I continue to talk about this. It's been around for a long time, for ages. So the data is organized into rows, right? Columns and tables. It's it's indexed to make it find so basically it's organized into this so that it's easier to find, right? So any information that you need to find, um, this is how it indexes your system, right? So if I were to draw a container or a box, right, and let's make this container green, for example, or actually let's see if I got a better uh, container I can use in here, I guess. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I do that. I do that. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to use this container. So this container denotes our database, right? So our database, and this is our database, right? So within our database, it's organized into rows, right? Grab my pen, right? So it's organized into rows, right? So here's a row, that's a row. So if we had a sheet of paper, right? We have our rows and we have our columns, right? So we have our rows and we have our columns, right? So this is a row, this is a column, right? And then this is our table. So our table, right? Our table, and these three or are all organized, which makes it easier for indexing and makes it easier to find any information that we need. So that's basically what a database is. It's the easiest way to explain it to you. Just think of it as a table, right? With rows, column, a data that's organized into rows, columns, and tables, straight up. Um, we collect that information, or that database collects it. The database collects all that information that's organized into rows, columns, and database and tables, and then indexed for you to easily find relevant information. So it could be anything that you're looking for. Um, you have to understand that when we talk about Microsoft SQL, make some pages here. I also want to talk about some topics that are important when we're talking about SQL servers. And the first thing we want to know is the plan. Is how are we going to plan this, and then install our SQL server, right? So it doesn't matter whatever version it is, right? So whatever version it is, then we have to understand. Okay, now that we've planned it and we've installed it, how are we going to configure and manage our SQL server instances, right? Right. We also need to know how we're going to configure um, our SQL server components, right? Right. That's also important too. We're going to also know how to migrate um, our servers, import things into our server, and export data into our server, right? We also need to know how to log in, right? What are the roles and feature? What roles are given to users and the users itself, right? So that's also important. Then we're also going to have to know how to secure it, right? We have to need to know how to secure it, and that's also important. How can we secure um, our servers, right? And again, we can architect that. We can design that. Um, we can implement different ideas and solutions in our architecture, right? So we also need to know how what mirroring and replication is, right? Um, this is important, and this is a topic that I need to touch base on, is because replication is important for our architecture, and I'll get to that point because this is the more important part of it, and you'll see in our design I'm going to touch points on all these topics, right? Just so that we're all on the same page, right? And we also, again, not only do we need to know how to mirror and replicate, we also need to know um, how to or what is clustering and always on, right? Because you'll see that a lot. Right? And you guys will hear this a lot in SQL or even in your SQL um, careers. You'll notice that it's widely used, right? And we also need to know how to troubleshoot. How can we troubleshoot the server, all right, which is our SQL server, right, version, right? So whatever our version is, right? So typically it's 2000, let's say 2xxx, whatever, 2019, 16, 22, 25, and 2025, right? Which is in preview mode. We also need to talk about indexes, right? And concurrency, they call it. And then we also need to talk about what is SQL Server Agent, right? Right. We have to, and then talk about backup and restore, right? So stand by, right? Enjoy yourself. Grab yourself a coffee because this might take a little bit of time. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but our main goal here is to talk about replication because replication is important, right? The data that's being replicated is what, and then how that's architected, right? Replication, right? So this is a main topic of mine because, we can set up our lab, we can design our lab, we can draw out our lab um, in a way where, we have our template machine and then our template machine will have modifications, right? We can have our modifications, right? Oh, let me draw my machines here, right? So I'll have my machine here. Then I'll have my server, which could be my domain controller, right? And then we'll have member servers, right? And then that can be our SQL with SQL server installed on top of it, right? And I got to go back to my um, three-tier machine architecture, right? So we'll have two clones for Windows Server, right? So that'll kind of be our setup, right? So we'll use this as our template machine. right? And this will have modifications on it, right? That we've done, and these modifications are imaged. And again, you have your snapshot files, and in Azure you have your AMIs, right, which is your images, right? And you can build those images and auto scale these images in AWS, right? And then you have your Azure services, your Azure um, servers, right? You can build your Azure servers, SQL light servers, um, templated already, right? And then, create those template machines. And in Azure we call it, if you guys remember, they call it ARM templates, ARM templates, right? Or just simply a template, simply called a template, right? But these templates are just JSON files, right? So these are JSON files. Make this a little bit bigger here. Let me draw this out, right? Oh, then we'll say this is a JSON file, right? And that'll define like your infrastructure configuration of any Azure resources, and that also includes your your virtual machines, right? So ARM is called a infrastructure as a code, right? Please make note of that. And that's for your engineers to talk about. Small letter C, right? And these templates will enable you to treat your infrastructure as a code, and this will allow automation, version controlling, and if you need to replicate or duplicate something or reproduce or just reproduce something. Again, the structures with sections for parameters or just different variables and outputs, but just kind of understand, um, you know, how Azure uses that, how Azure can use that. And JSON, again, JSON stands for you engineers out there and developers, JavaScript, object notation, right? And again, these JSON, these ARM templates are typically created within the cloud environment, right? And we can create those ARM templates or resource manager templates. They're called resource manager templates. ARM stands for Azure Resource um, Resource Manager, right? And those are templates again, right? So these again, the templates again, they do define your infrastructure and they define the configuration for those resources, and that includes your Azure machines, right? When we're talking about when we talk about how to create a template machine in VMware Workstation Pro, we can create a virtual machine, right? We can give our template machine an X amount of GB. We can assign memory to it and then just click finish, right? Once that's and this can be done in our hypervisor 2 software, right? So this can also be done in our hypervisor software, right? Or in like ESXi, VMware ESXi, and then we can do this within our Workstation Pro already. Pro that we download. And again, this could be also a hypervisor one, right? You can install this on hypervisor one, which is our ESXi, right? And then this would be our hypervisor two. So It's important to know that this template machine will have modifications. We can give it as many modifications as we want, and this will be our basis for our machines, right? So we'll have our basis. We can have our modifications and whatnot. And again, it could be any modification. It could be any character that you want to give it. You could do time and date and time, sorry. You can do server uh, name default, right? You know, you can do what else? What else? Activation, right? Give it activation. Um, you know, you can give it power management. Certain things like that. You can give it specific application services that you need that are common in a lot of your servers, right? So, disabling, you can disable updates, right? And have using config manager, sconfig, right? In our servers. So that's something we could talk about too. Um, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we can do. And again, our updates can be managed within Intune or within our SCCM, and these are managed by IT, right? So when we're making these specific, and again, we can also turn on, we can install the VMware tools, right? That's another thing, install VMware tools, right? For display and others, right? We can, turn off IE. And again, these are some just examples of it. Doesn't mean that you need to do it, but again, these are some things that we could do, right? Just remember, a snapshot file and AMI are used often um, in within when we talk about our AWS console, right? We can build those AMI images, right? Um, from our EC2, right? So this could be our AWS EC2 instance, and that can be used again. Um, it's just an AMI. Here, I'll just write this out for you guys. So you know what AMI means. So AMI is used for AWS. It's an AWS term. That's called Amazon Machine Image, and you'll hear this a lot, right? Um, and what this is it's just a special type of virtual appliance that that's used to create a VM or virtual machine within EC2, right? So it serves as a basic unit of deployment for your services delivered when using EC2, right? I'll make this a purple, dark purple. There you go. So we have this template machine. It'll have all our modifications. Again, in our hypervisor 2 software, we can use ESXi, right? And create our machines within those, or virtual machines on top of our ESXi, right? Or we can just have a machine that's just, has our software on top of it. Here, and I'll just put the line denoting across from it. There you go. All right. Um, make this black. It looks like it doesn't want to do it. Okay, so I'm gonna go like this. I'm just gonna make it again. And remember what we talked about is our on top, our hypervisor 2 software is our Workstation Pro, our hypervisor 2, which could be our ESXi, right? But within our laptops, we're using our, let me make that clear. This is on our laptops, on top of our laptops or desktops, right? and right, and we can build a virtual machine within that, and just give it our specific you know modifications that we want, right? And give it whatever we need to do in order to get this completed, right? So we can launch configurations after and give out auto scaling for this. We can set up our auto scaling. Just I think if I'm not mistaken, there's 6 steps to that, and we can create those modifications based on those 2 servers or AMI images that we created, right? Um, or ARM templates within our Azure environments, right? So I think Google uses for images, Google Cloud uses uh, they call it compute. They use operating system images for compute engine. Um, and they use operating system and they create root persistent disks for our um, for our instances. All right, let's see what they call it. It's been a while since I did that, but they call it okay, so they call it a point in time, right? So Google Cloud or GCP, right? Their images are meant their images are used to create images are used to create uh, boot disks, right? Which contain um, an operating system or an OS and a bootloader, right? And then snapshots, snapshots uh, are used to capture point in time, PIT, copy of your persistent disk, right? Snapshots are usually meant for backups, which can also be incremental. While your images are often used for just creating a new instance. There's no specific name for those images that I see so far that I can remember. Um, but they're just basically like for example, you have your image. It's just a template, right? That contains that OS, right? So you have your OS, right? And then the bootloader, which sits on top of that. Um, I can get you a picture just to show you guys uh, what creating a snapshot looks like for Google Cloud. And I want to add it here. And I will also add it into our notes here. And it talks about uh, creating a snapshot within Google Cloud, GCP, right? But again, this is an idea. This is just um, a way to do it. Just remember your image. You need that bootloader. Um, the bootloader that sits in the hard disk or the physical disk, right, or virtual disk, right? So you'll have your operating system that sits on top of that, and then you'll have your applications that sit on top of that too. But you'll have your disks here, your physical disks, right? And your physical disks, right? In this case, we'll have two or three, right? We can have two or three physical disks, and we'll have our operating system that sits on top of um our what's it that's preloaded within our drives, right? So we'll have our drives here. And some of them might have two, some of them might have three, right? So we'll denote, two or three just for now as a backup scenario, right? And then our member servers, our server itself can have, you know, our domain controller can have two, and then our other servers can have three. We can have one for transactional logs, and then installation files, and database logs. So we can have three or four hard disks, right, created, right, for this machine, for these machines, right, and then create our template machines off of that. And then we can create our RAID configuration, right? We can do our RAID configurations, right? We can say this is our RAID configuration, and we can give it a RAID configuration of one. Um, so uh, we can do a RAID 1 configuration, right? If that makes sense. Um, and we can talk about, give me 1 second, guys. This is RAID 1. We'll save it, RAID 1. And I want to bring a piece of information. And again, this is all up to you. Your template machine does not have to have four disks, but again, our template machine can have two disks, right, for installation files, right? But remember, when we're creating template machines, it's just we're creating these machines that will have those modifications. It doesn't necessarily need to have disks. Our member servers that we're going to create, so these could be like our member servers, right? These are going to be our member servers, right? And this is also a member server, right? That's part of our domain, right? That's going to be part of our domain. This one too. Let me make this a little bit smaller. So this will also be a member server, right? What we're going to be testing our databases, right? So we'll have our databases here. Right? We'll create our databases within these machines, and we can have as many databases as we want within these machines, right? And then right? And then when we talk about these machines, right? These machines will have our SQL server installed, right? So we'll have SQL server installed on it. Right? So SQL server will be installed, right? Right. And these can have Windows, let's say Windows 2016, 2019, or 2022, 2022, or even 2025 as your operating system, right? So just make sure that you're building these machines with that operating system in place. And these will all have the same operating systems, right? So this will have your operating system, and this will be installed on your C drive, right? Typically. So any installation files, um, when we're installing that and when we're building our logs and our transactional files, we can build them on top of that, right? But when we're building this template machine, you don't necessarily need to have all this in place. You know, you can add more disks within our Workstation Pro environment if you want, but it's also always good to start off with um, a temporary idea and then build on top of that temporary idea, right? So, you know, um, this is also going to have our operating system, right? Our C drive, and this is our physical disk. These are going to be physical disk, right? Right. Or it could be, if it's in our Workstation Pro, these will be V disks, right? Uh, Virtually. So remember, we're pretending here this is a fictitious environment, and when we're building these environments, we have to be aware of you know how things are work, right? Give me 1 second, guys. So yeah, that's it. So this is all gonna have the same concept. So I don't want to make it too confusing, but again, you can pick any server that you want, even 2012 if you want, although it's been deprecated and doesn't support it anymore. But again, these are specific ideas that you can have, right? So this will have your C drive, and this also be your physical disk, and this will also be your physical, and this will be a C drive as well too, right? And we're going to install this server. We're going to install our server, and then on top of that, we're going to install our SQL applications, right? SQL server, right? And this will also be installed, which is our SSMS, right? Which is another application that you want to install. This will also be installed SSMS, right? Management Studio, and this will also have the same installed on our member servers as well too. Okay, so all right, all right. So again, this is going to be our database. This will be our database, and you can have as many databases as you want, right? So this will be oh, this will be database one, and this is going to be your design, right? So I want to make sure that you guys are all doing the same thing and filling out the information as we move along, right? So again, this will all be, and then you can also, again, you can have logs, right? Should have logs there too as well. If you want, you can have a database that has just transactional logs, right? So that's another database. And this is another database, right? So, and again, this is replicating. This will be replicating to our databases, right? Get another color here. Get a red pen. Get my red pen. And again, this will be replicating, right? Right. Synchronously, which is a great term to understand, right? So this will be synchronous replication. And when we talk about synchronous replication, we talk about in a couple words, replicates at the same time, right? So it'll replicate at the same time, right? And that's the replication, right? And that goes. again, back and forth between that, right? If we were to have a domain controller, again, our domain controller, um, let me delete this, right? So if this was our domain controller, let's say, for example, let's put our domain controller, if we did have one, right? Um, we have our roles and features, right? Installed on these, we can have our roles and features. So we would install our ADDS, our ADDS, our DNS, our AAA, right? And our DHCP. And this will also have a global catalog, right? So, and that's all installed on here. Um, just remember, this is just an idea. It's something that we need to invest in our time, right? So, we're gonna have, if I were to, right? So this is gonna be um, our architecture, right? And this is what's going to synchronize um, our synchronous replication is going to happen between our database one and server two and server three, right? In our member servers. So we have to understand how that works, right? Um, for moving further along, um, I want to talk about um, you know, replication, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger now, right? I want to talk about replication architecture and the use of its terminology and how the components interact with the replication technology topology, right? So the replication topology um, uses the following terms to denote what each thing does and how it works, right? So say for example, this is your Toronto branch, right? This is our Toronto branch, right? Let me make this a little bit better, a little bit greener. This here, okay. All right. So this is our Toronto branch, right? And I'm going to select and put this at the bottom here. So we know this is our Toronto branch, right? So this is going to sit within our branch. Okay, and within our branch, we have our three servers. And between replication, we have synchronous replication happening at the same time between our databases, right? We have to understand what terms are used in order to create and interact in our replication of our topologies, right? So within our topologies, we have specific terms like publisher. Uh, bring my presentation up. Okay, so I'm going to talk about replication architecture, right? And, you know, topology, right? And these are important topics, right? And these terms are important because this tells you and this makes up our replication and how things get replicated in an SQL environment, right? So first thing we're going to look at is our publisher, right? And second, we're going to talk about article. Third, we're going to talk about subscriber. It's out of the way. Subscriber. We're going to talk about articles, right? And then we'll talk about publication because you're going to hear this a lot. And then you're going to talk about distributors. We're going to, right? And in this lab, in this course, we're going to show you how to do this, right? We're not going to do this today, but we're going to show you how to do this and how to create your design and get ready for that because, as you start creating your own designs, you need to understand the the theory around it, right? And what each stuff means, right? Because you have to understand how there's cluster, how you configure clustering, and you also need to know how to replicate databases, right? Because in SQL databases, and not just replication, but we're talking about database replication here, right? And we're not going to talk about what it is, but we're also going to talk about it. Let's talk about Microsoft SQL database replications, right? So these are some great topics to talk about, and you're going to hear this a lot in our database administration environment. So be prepared, right? And know the different features and how these instant features or shared features are used when we're installing um, our SQL servers and setting up our SQL server, right? And how we can use this and how these specific terminologies are used to describe the different types of components that we're going to be using, right? So, um, first off, we're going to talk about what a publisher is. So, publisher is just an instance that makes all data available through a publication, right? Just remember when we talk about publication, we talk about a collection of articles, right? Right. Publisher again is just a instance that makes data available through publication, right? And we know that publication is a bunch of articles, right? So through publication or collection of articles. Very, very, very important. Um, so moving down to the next step, to the next part or term that you're going to hear a lot of is what a subscriber is, right? We talked about publication as a collection of articles. Our publisher is an instance that makes our data available through the publication, through a publication, right? Right? Our subscriber, um, right? And right, and our publisher also sends the data, right? So this will also send the data, right? And then it'll send those changes to the server from there and use triggers to track those changes, right? So the publisher sends the data, also sends the data, right? And it sends changes to a server or instance, right? From your location, right? So wherever your location is. So that'll also send um, the location. And then another thing is it also publisher also uses triggers to track those changes, right? You're gonna hear that a lot. And this is especially when you're merging. You also when it remains statically available over a WAN or a LAN, within a LAN, right? So from devices from people that are on the move. You're also going to see a lot of merge replications, and again, these servers inside your branches are going to be that data is going to be statically available for everybody, right? And these servers are going to be within those different branches. And again, when we're sending it, when you have specific users in a move in a replication topology, um, see if I can draw this out, right? So you have your different locations, right? So you have your 3 points, right? And this will be America, US, right? So we could say this is Canada, right? US, and Europe, right? Or Asia, right? Or we can even have Asia. We can have Africa. We can have, Asia, let's say, for example, right? And then we can have Africa, right? So what happens is, again, in this replication, our publisher, right? Our publisher, for example, in this location, sends the data, which is us, the user, right? So if we're a user, let's say this is our user, right? So we send the data wherever we are, within those servers, within those branches, right? Right. So wherever those branches are, right? So here's our branches within Canada, our 3 locations, right? And it'll send um, the changes to the server from the location that we're at. And then with inside those branches, they use triggers to track those changes, right? And again, once it receives the data, it's called a subscriber. So we have a subscriber, right? And when we talk about subscribers, we'll just say this star is a subscriber, and then we'll have our dot as our publisher, right? We'll just say that for now. All right, right. So you have to understand um, now what a subscriber is, right? So your subscriber um, allows you um, from the publisher to the subscriber sends the data, which allows you to read and write changes, right? So you again, you can have a set of peers or a group of peers within an availability topology in availability or within your topology geographically, right? Within your branches, within your sites, within your availability zones, within your data centers, right? So, when we talk about um, our subscriber, it just receives the publications, right? So remember, publisher sends the data, and subscribers receive the publications, right? Or data. And remember, we talked about articles, right? So it's a collection of articles. Um, and that's important to note because um, we so basically your publisher is just like in quick hindsight, in a few words, to kind of understand. Yeah, it does send it, but it's basically a database, right? So everything's a database. So it's just a database um, that sends data to your subscriber, right? Um, to your subscriber, right? And remember, your subscriber is the one that receives the publications, so it'll receive the data, or that collection of articles, right? Because we know our publication is a collection of articles, right? Um, so just make note of that and don't get it mixed up, right? Remember, our user is on the move, right? So we can get our data, our salesmen who have this data. Are there's always those replications that are happening between our servers, right? And our servers can be anywhere. So you have to understand when we talk about our articles, we talk about views, we talk about defined functions, we talk about tables, right? And this to our next point is articles, right? And these are just objects. These are known as objects um, to publish as articles, right? And that's what an article is, objects to publish, right? And some examples we can say of articles are um, we have tables, right? We have stored procedures. I've seen stored procedure, and you're going to see this as well too when you're creating new publications. Um, Different views, right? We have indexed views, right? And then we also have defined functions, right? User defined functions, right? And these are the specific, we can actually further that information and filter these tables and filter the stored procedures within the wizard when you're creating these, um, when you're setting up your new publication, right? And lastly, another part of it is our distributor. We're going to hear a lot of that, our distributor. Our distributor is just an instance, right? So it's an instance that manages um, the transmission part of it from the publisher to the subscriber, right? So um, that are either on the same LAN, right? Or WAN. And again, if if a distributor is on the same LAN, this is also important too. If you're, and I'll draw this out after. So if your distributor um, is on the same LAN, right, locally or on premises as the publisher, um, it's called a local. It's called a local distributor, right? Right, and then there's also a WAN, right? So if your distributor is on the same WAN network or remote uh, from the publisher, we call that a remote. We call it a remote distributor, right? Or remote from the publisher. It's called a remote distributor, right? I'm just gonna move this out of the way. There you go. Okay. So a distributor is just an instance that manages the transmission from the published to the subscriber, or the publisher to the subscriber, right? Just remember what we talked about in terms of, you know, uh, what a publisher is and what a subscriber is. Remember, we have our subscriber, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to draw this all out for you guys in a second because I want you guys to kind of get the understand how this works, right? So we have our two member servers, our two SQL servers, and one of them is our database, and one of them is going to be um, one of them is going to be our database publisher, and the other one's going to be the subscriber, right? So if we're going into it doesn't matter on the location, but this is sort of our local on premises. This is what our local is going to be look like, and then I'm going to explain to you what a WAN um, uh, environment looks like, or it could also be a data center, right? So this could be our branch or data center, um, and then we can also have our cloud environments too. Well, again, all, all make my palette a little bit bigger here, right? And then it's going to be our cloud, right? um, just remember, um, when we look at our two servers here, and I'm gonna grab my arrow here. So if we have one server here, I'll make this red. Um, make this red. Okay. All right. So here's one server. Here's our database server, right? And this is going to be our server number two, our full server number two with our SQL server installed in our SMS um, installed on top of that. We're also going to have our second member server, which is going to act as our subscriber. And then we're going to add our distributor to it, right? So even if we were to add our distributor to something, right? Our distributor, like I said before, um, one second. Okay. All right, let me make that a little bit bigger for you guys. So we have our two databases, right? We have our two databases, right? Here's one, here's two, right? So this is also obviously this is going to be synchronizing, right? At the same time, so you're going to get a lot of that information, right? So you're going to have a publisher here. So within here, you're going to have your publisher, and I'm going to give it a blue color here. So this is going to be our publisher, right? And this is going to be our subscriber. And remember what I said, our publisher is our database, right? So this is our publisher. And this is going to be our database that's sending the data to the subscriber, right? So you're going to see a lot of synchronous replication happening at the same time. And then you're also going to have a local distributor and within our LAN. So this will also be our local distributor, right? Right? And that makes sure that the data from the publisher is being sent to the subscriber, right? So we're going to have that as part of our our architecture and replication. And you'll have your distributor and your publisher doing two different things, and you also have your SQL agent, right? And that'll also be installed on all SQL servers by default. Um, but by default, it's disabled. We just need to make sure that there's a green circle, and we're enabling that for the replication to work. So you'll have to have your agent installed and work and running on both machines, right? SQL agent installed, right? And on, right? Yeah. And then this also has to be on, right? So that agent that needs to be on. And then again, that has to be by default, it's disabled. We need to make sure that it's enabled for replication to work, right? So when we create multiple tables, those tables will be replicated from one DB to another DB across the line. Any changes will also be replicated from one SQL server to another, right? So any even if we create multiple tables, again, those tables will be um, replicated from one database to another database, right? So just make sure that you understand that and how that's important, right? So anything that's replicated would be a copy or just an independent. So even if it's just a copy of it, you can also have a database that's independent, that's just practically new, right? So you just don't have to have a copy. You can also have something that's independent. It's a database that's independent and that's just basically new. You can also have replication services enabled. You need to make sure that it's enabled, right, within your servers and make sure that your agents are installed on both of them, right? So replication needs to be enabled, right, and active. So just make sure that that's part of your design, right, and that it's constantly being replicated at the same time. Um, it's pretty straightforward. There's nothing too hard about it. Just remember when we have our distributor, our local distributor, there's also a WAN distributor. And again, this could be in another branch, right, in the cloud or just another branch in general on the WAN. So you'll have something on the WAN, right? And we'll have like, leased lines where you can have different link aggregation lines or VPNs, site-to-site VPNs enabled, um, right? You can have a site-to-site VPN, which is uh, uh, again something to think about when you're creating when you're designing this, right? So between your LAN, your local distributor and your remote distributor, right? So if you would have a remote distributor here, let's see if we can draw this out here. So if I'm drawing out a remote distributor, right? So this will be a remote distributor on the WAN, right? Our users across the WAN in another branch, right? So this would be in another branch. We can use that site-to-site VPN that's connected to two branches, right? So it'll connect to our two branches, um, right? One in the cloud or wherever in our data center. Put that as a triangle because this will be our second branch, right? So we can have our other branch, and then that distributor would have full communication from the other branch to its publisher, right? So just remember that that's how that works. Um, Give me 1 second. So I'm not going to show you guys what it looks like, but again, just have that idea and have because that is important. When you're doing these different replications, right? Um, there's different types of replications and topologies that have participating databases. Where you have your two application servers load balancing between those databases machines. And there is a lot of replicated data and there is a lot of read and write and user traffic going between those two participating databases, right? um, so and then you also have um, your different types of replications. I'm not going to touch base on the different types, but just know that there are your snapshots and your transactional replications. Then you also have your P2P replication software like BitTorrent, for example. And then you also have your merge replication. And I'm going to give you guys a link on um, where to read up on that, these specific publications, right? And you'll see that, you know, um, these specific publications uh, for replication should be able to best suit the requirements of your application that you're using. So take into consideration and benefit from these specific uh, types of publications or replications um, as you're designing your your environment, right? Or architecting your environment, right? Just remember, different our replication topology can differ depending on where the users are and how where the users are on the move, and how these different servers send changes to specific other servers in different topologies geographically or different regions or availability zones in the cloud. So, they exchange all these roles that have been changed between the publisher, so there's a lot of data that's been exchanged. Just know the different replications and, like I said, snapshots, understand what that is, transactional replication, merge replication, um, you know, how to install different features within our SQL server. Here's a picture of something that I can show you guys of that. And I'm gonna put all the pictures here for you guys. So this is where we would add, repair, and remove if we were need to install the replication feature, right? And when we're doing our lab again, we're making sure two SQL servers have been added in the GUI. We're making sure that um, two of our SQL servers are member servers, right? And we'll have one of them where we'll install our distributor and this distributor will keep an eye on the publisher and subscriber, right? So that's what that does. And I'm going to um, put that in my notes because this will help you understand um, what that does. And again, like I said before, the agent itself uh, is installed, right? So it's installed on all SQL servers, right? Just remember, but by default, you'll see that it is disabled, right? So we or your admins or your admins would uh, need to enable this for replication to work, right? Or if not, replication won't work. So it's important that you guys understand that. Um, when we talk about load balancing, we talk about that. There's you have your your load balance between two participating uh, app databases, as you can see in A and B. So you'll note that there is data being replicated and there's a lot of read and write that's being load balanced from your application server. And you'll see a lot of the user traffic that's going in here and you'll see it in the picture. You'll see these arrows here. Grab my pen here. So these are your users, right? So this is your users that are using and they're constantly coming in and they're using your applications, right? So there's a lot of from that application server, you should be able to now load balance, right? The read and write traffic or the read and write from the user's traffic. So it should be able to balance out and replicate the data between your publisher and your subscriber, right? Right. So this would be your publisher, this would be your subscriber, right? So, making sure that you architect this and making sure that that helps you understand how this all works and how this is all integrated, right? Uh, but just remember, this can all be done on Azure. This can all be done in as AWS or Google Cloud. If you are creating a template, make sure you're using your AMI for that for Azure for AWS, and then you can use your Azure ARM templates, or you can create your templates within your own environment, your home environment and your lab. And just remember, have fun with it. This is Sal Cosentino signing off. Thank you again, and have a great Monday.